All right. So hello. Thanks for coming out tonight. Um, I think, sorry, there we go. Um, I'm getting a notification I shouldn't be getting. Okay, there we go. So thanks for coming out. Tonight we're going to go ahead with our budget consultation. We have the counselors here, obviously, but we also have city staff here to give a presentation. So just before we get into that, we'll let the counselors start off with their comments and their opening comments. Counselor Leeper, did you want to go first?
Sure, I can keep it very brief. First of all, thanks to the staff from all three of our offices who worked very hard on pulling this together. And certainly, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that I think we are all here. Even though we're virtual, we are on the unceded and never surrender territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe, and I think that's critical for us to recognize. Um, Very briefly, this is my ninth budget process, and it looks very familiar this year to the eight that I've been through previously, in that council has taken the decision to cap the revenue increase to 2.5% on the property tax bill. There will be some additional revenues that come in from new assessments, so new properties that have started to be taxed now. But overall, the city council has chosen to cap our tax rate increase, or our tax increase, at 2.5%. I think that's going to make it very, very challenging to try to deliver all of the services that residents expect and deserve. I think we all kind of have the feeling that even things like basic maintenance are not being done to our satisfaction. We have the feeling that park garbage cans are overflowing more often. It is taking longer to get a response from bylaw. All those frontline services that make a big difference in the quality of our life as Ottawa residents. But I also have to recognize that, my top two priorities here are also not well served by a cap of 2.5%. We have to have a functioning transit system, and I am concerned about what a decision to cap our increase at 2.5% is going to mean for transit in this city. I may not share the opinion of everyone, but I do feel that we are on the right track with respect to eventually getting our LRT in proper operation. But the bus service is extremely problematic right now. The city is hiring more bus operators. We are told that that will help us to improve reliability of our bus service, but it is important for us to invest more. One of the questions that people often ask me is with respect to Parkdale Avenue, and what are we going to do to fix Parkdale? Because of course Parkdale is a parking lot for the most part. And my answer always is the only answer to the congestion that we're experiencing in the city is to ensure that people have full use of active transportation and public transportation. Those are going to require investments. It is not enough for us to simply say that these alternative modes to private vehicle travel are going to be more critical moving forward. We actually have to invest in safe infrastructure and in our transit operations to ensure that that happens. My second priority that I talked a lot about during the election, of course, was housing. The city has an important role to play, not the only role to play, but an important role to play in making capital investments in building new affordable housing, either through our subsidiary Ottawa Community Housing or with our not-for-profit housing partners. We are currently putting about $15 million a year into the capital funds available for building that deeply affordable housing. I don't think it's enough. I do agree with the mayor that the other levels of government need to kick in as well, but I think we would be well served to demonstrate our commitment to ensuring there is more affordable housing by allocating more of our budget to it. I think if I were the premier of the province and saying, why do you get to have a very reasonable 2.5% increase that doesn't really upset anyone? Um, and you put all of the burden on the provincial taxpayer, I think we can send a strong message by making a stronger commitment ourselves as a city to using our own source funds to build more affordable housing and lead the way for those other levels of government. So housing and transit are critical. I don't know how much we're going to be able to achieve in terms of service improvements when the 2.5% increase is well below inflation. So it will be another challenging budget for those of us who are seeking to deliver a higher level of service to Ottawa residents. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Tess.
Awesome. Thank you, Councillor Leeper. I'll pass it off to Councillor Menard.
Thank you so much, Tessa, and welcome everybody. I also want to just thank our teams, our staff that have done such a good job to get this together. And Miles is in our office, but there's a lot of other staff from other offices here that I just really appreciate how much work you've done to get this up and running. I wrote, I guess it was a few years now, 10 ways the City of Ottawa's budget needs to change. So if you Google that, 10 ways the City of Ottawa's budget needs to change, you'll see the arguments that we've put forward time and time again. And we're really hoping that, after the LRT inquiry, after everything we've seen with our transit system, that people start listening a little bit more to different voices. And so when we wrote this, we talked a lot about, our office talked a lot about not expanding the urban boundary, that housing people who are house insecure is not only the right thing to do, it also saves money on social service costs and helps people contribute back to local communities. That reducing new road expansion is a way to save a lot of money for very little benefit when you expand roads. Fighting climate change, so retrofitting our buildings. The more we can induce activities like walking and biking, the more the city saves. We saw that with the Bank Street Bridge, with the pylons we put up initially, very cheap, but it saves money to do those sorts of things to encourage people to take that action. Parking rates have, everything's gone up in the city. Our transit rates go up, but parking rates stay very, very stagnant in the city. That needs to change. It's the number one way to reduce congestion without tolls. So if you want to reduce congestion, tweak the parking rates. Vacant buildings, we've actually made some progress on that. One we have made progress on in this list, to penalties to encourage redevelopment on our traditional main streets. Brownfield subsidies to developers. We give a huge amount of subsidies to developers. We got to rein that in. I know there's a review going on now. I hope staff comes back with the right recommendation on that, which is to reduce those subsidies heavily, given how much money we've spent on them. Over, I believe it's over $150 million over the last 15 years. Reducing P3s. Our P3s have been woefully inadequate on the LRT, on Lansdowne. We've seen them not deliver when it comes to our finances. These things are increasing our costs and our reputational harm, and we need to stop entering into these large P3 agreements. Examining the police budget is the last one I'll mention. I think we've got finally a mental health response team that's operating now. It's going to be operating in Somerset Ward as a pilot. Really glad to see that. We've been fighting for that for years, and that can reduce police calls, save money, but I think we need to detask more and more given the cost of policing that we're seeing. So just a few things that I'd like to see going forward, and hopefully our city starts listening to some different voices given where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'll pass it off to Councillor Troster.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I always worry. It's been 3.5 years on Zoom and we're still doing this. So thank you so much for being here tonight. I agree with the things that my colleagues just said on the call. In Somerset Ward, we're really struggling with the impacts of the affordability crisis in general. Citywide, more and more people are hungry. Food banks are seeing 30% more usage. Every social service organization in the city, even if food is not their core mandate, they're serving food because people are hungry. And there's been a real, with the price of food inflation going so high, the cost of a one-bedroom apartment now over $2,000 a month, it's incredibly urgent for us to make life more affordable for the people who are struggling the most in our city. And there was a recent study by the CMHC that shows, we have a ton of private development happening in our city, but that's not promoting or building the kind of deeply affordable housing that we need to fight homelessness. So as Councillor Leeper mentioned, we recently voted on the allocations for our capital affordable housing plan, and there's some really exciting projects in there. But there are also many shovel-ready projects for deeply affordable housing in our city that are sitting on a list that are unfunded because we're not making this a priority. And so I think we can do a lot better. I think $15 million a year is not nearly enough. And also, as Councillor Leeper said, when we show initiative, it attracts funding from other levels of government. The issue with the homelessness crisis really started with the federal government pulling out of building affordable housing about 30 years ago. And then it's become this jurisdictional fight where it's like, well, it's the Fed's responsibility. Well, it's the province's responsibility. We can't do it alone as a city. We know we can't do it alone, but we can show ambition, and that'll attract ambition from other levels of government. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my little piece on municipal finance reform, which I will scream for the rooftops, as nerdy as it sounds, because municipalities manage 60% of the infrastructure across Canada, and we get between 8 and 9 cents on every dollar. We have very few revenue sources, so we get it. Property taxes are unpopular. They're not a great source of revenue. They're very, very frustrating for us as a city. But if we want a city that works, we need a city that we're going to invest in. And something that I said when we were voting on budget direction was, we list all these priorities for our city, but then we don't fund them. So I attempted to put a motion forward when we were voting on budget direction, which would have directed some of the growth coming into our city into our budget priorities, specifically affordable housing. It was ultimately voted down. But, you know, because the conversation was saying that growth should pay for growth. But my question is, who are we growing this city for, and who's being left behind? I am really happy to see that the non-police crisis intervention pilot is coming to Somerset Ward. It is so desperately needed. Issues around addiction, homelessness, and the related security issues that happen when people's needs are not met. That's been the #1 issue that I've been dealing with in the neighborhood. So I am hopeful. I am really excited about this pilot. But in the next few years, if this is something that we want to scale across the city, then we are going to have to make critical choices about where we put our money, because it's going to have to come from somewhere. And if we're ultimately replacing some of the work that police are doing that is non-policing work, that will require eventually a transfer of resources. Right now, it's a $3 million a year program that I believe is going to be funded out of the existing envelope for community social services. But the reality is, if we want to scale this, we're going to have to find a source of funding. So I don't want to say much more. I just when I like to say, what we fund says who we are, the way we budget says who we are. When we have a police budget that never seems to have a ceiling, that is now currently over $400 million a year, and every single health and social service agency in this city comes to me and they're begging for scraps. And so we want to get at the roots of a lot of these challenges. We want to prevent crime. We want to promote community well-being. We don't want people to be hungry. We want people to have an affordable place to live. Those are worthwhile investments, and they're also economically smart. They save us money over time. When our neighbors are doing better, we all do better. So thank you so much for being here. I do think it's a good sign that we are having this consultation now before the budget has been tabled. Last year, we weren't able to do that because it was a tighter period, because it was post-election. So I really look forward to what people have to say today. And also, I'm not sure if you saw when we sent out the reminder for this meeting, but our 3 offices have launched a budget survey that you can fill out online. You can find it at arieltroster.com/budget2024. And this is really asking you the critical questions. What are the things that are your priorities? Are you willing to pay a little bit more to have those priorities satisfied? And how much more? Because it's very, very helpful for us to get a sense of what constituents are feeling, because I know we're all feeling the squeeze. But I fundamentally believe that if we invest a little bit more, we will all benefit. And that if we have a city that leaves no one behind, it's actually more prosperous, more vibrant, and a better place to live for all of us. So thank you so much. I will leave it to the team now.
Awesome, thank you. Before we head into the city staff presentation, I did just want to let everyone know, city staff are going to give a technical briefing on the budget. And then following that, we're going to do some specific questions that are just commonly asked, that are things we've been hearing a lot in each of our offices. And then we'll have an opportunity for people for questions and comments. When we do move into that, it'll be using the raise hand function, but you're also able, at any point, you can leave questions in the chat, or you can also, if you don't want to talk publicly or send any questions tonight, you can send an email to any one of the 3 offices, and our teams would be happy to get back to you. But for now, I'll pass it off to city staff. Cyril, do you need us to pull up slides or anything?
No, I think Suzanne, you're going to pull it up, I think. So we'll just give it a sec here. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Cyril Rogers. I'm the interim Chief Finance Officer and General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services at the City of Ottawa. Suzanne S, as her tag name, is here in my part of my team as well. So tonight I'm going to go through more of the technical side of the budget process, how it works, some components of that. I do believe the Councillor's Office do have this presentation, so I encourage you to share it through your constituents if they reach out. And then we were happy to take some questions once I'm done the presentation. So we'll jump right in. Next slide. Okay. So basically, I'm going to give an overview tonight of the basics of the municipal budget, the process that we go through in terms of when we start the process, and we kind of go through the deep dive, and then obviously into the formal tabling of the budget, and finally into the committee reviews, delegations, and finally with adoption at the end of the process. Next slide. So basically, the first section, what I'm going to cover is basically the requirements of the Municipal Act, which is basically what we're governed by. The Municipal Act does govern municipalities to balance the budget, so we cannot balance for deficits. Unlike our federal and provincial partners, they have the ability to budget for deficits. We don't have that luxury, if you will, if it is a luxury. I'm going to speak to the difference between the operating budget and the capital budget. Touch a little bit on the funding sources. Councillor Trosser did mention, the limited amount of money that we actually get from our revenue base from a taxation perspective, and the limited tools that we really have to leverage within the municipality in terms of generating revenue. I'll touch on the different levies. We do have a couple of different tax levies, and then I'll speak a little bit about the user fees and the charges in terms of one of the other revenue items that we do have in our toolbox. Next slide. So basically, every year, the city does produce a municipal budget. We are required by legislation to put forward a budget. Again, as I mentioned, we do need to have a balanced budget. And what that really means is all of our expenditures that we go out the door, we need to have equal or matching revenues coming in. So again, if whatever our cost is, we need to have those revenues and from a budget perspective. So overall, when we do our full budget tabling, you will see it's a balance. All the costs equals to all the revenues. And this is a requirement as per the Municipal Act and is mandated by legislation. Next slide, please. So two things that you will see in the budget, in our budget, we speak to our operating budget, and we also speak to our capital budget. So basically, a basic operating budget, these are the costs that we incur to basically provide services on a daily basis. So our compensation costs, the cost that we pay our salaries, the cost that we pay for our fire services, our paramedics, our garbage collections, those are day-to-day operations that we run that we need to provide from a daily service provider perspective. When we move over to the capital side, the capital really is focused on what we refer to as capital tangible assets. So these are significant expenditures that we incur that go beyond 1 year. So that excludes the operating costs. And the capital budget is developed from a variety of different council approved reports, such as at a very high level, our official plan, which then kind of feeds into our transportation master plan, which then kind of feeds into our infrastructure master plans, then kind of evolves into our development charge, background study, and then ultimately down to our long-range financial plans. We do have a number of different long-range financial plans. We have one for our tax-supported asset base. We have one for our RAID program. And in 2021 was our first time that we did the housing long-range financial plan. And you will see a refresh of that plan through the budget cycle. I did commit in the 2023 budget process that I would be coming back with a refresh housing long-range financial plan. So that report will come during the budget process as well in terms of the investments that we're planning on making in the housing long-range financial plan. Next slide, please. When we look at the two different budgets from an operating perspective and a capital budget perspective, so there's different funding sources that we use to fund that. Our main source of funding for the operating budget is our tax levy. Our taxes generate anywhere between 48 to 52% of the overall revenue that comes into the system. We also have user fees and charges. I'll speak to a little bit more detail a little later, but user fees are like your water bill, your recreational fees, your transit fees. We do get assessment growth. So any new house that comes on to the tax roll in a year, that's an incremental taxation revenue that we get for the next year. We do have some programs that are, funded from provincial and federal funding. Our paramedics, as an example, most of our paramedic service is 50-50, so 50% funded by the city, 50% funded by the province. There are different components of the paramedics budget that does receive 75% and 100% funding. OPH is typically 70%, 30%, so 70% from the province, 30% from the city. We also have what we refer to as payment in lieu of taxes. And really what that means is just kind of a sophisticated way of saying all the federal and crown corporation buildings in the city of Ottawa, they don't physically get a tax bill, but what they do as per legislation is they make a payment to us in lieu of that. So again, they don't get a physical tax bill, but they do pay what we refer to as payment in lieu of taxes to the city. And then we do have a significant amount of income from our treasury side. We do have a lot of debentures and bonds, which we generate a lot of investment income, which helps fund the overall city services. So all that funding there, that kind of funds help support the operating budget. On the capital side, we do have a portion of our property taxes that do get allocated to the capital budget. Development charges is a significant component of the capital funding. So when new subdivisions or new developments occur, there's a significant amount of infrastructure and cost to support that development. So developers pay development fees, which helps fund the infrastructure for that development. We do have a number of federal and provincial funding agreements, stage 1, stage 2, typically either a third. So a third funding from the province, a third funding from the feds, and then a third funding from the municipality. We do issue debt. So debt can be referred to as a mortgage on your house, as an example, to keep it simple. So we do issue debt in terms of for our capital assets that span multiple years. And then on the water utility rate supporter program, that's all recovered through the utility fees from your water bills. Next slide, please. So the city does have what we refer to as 4 different kind of buckets. So the tax supported budget, these are your main city services in terms of your paramedics, your fire, solid waste, winter operations, potholes, road maintenance. Those are core services funded from your property tax levy. The transit levy, so on your property tax bill, there is a separate levy for transit. So transit is funded by the transit tax levy and user fees, which is the fare revenues. The police services budget as well, they have a separate levy on the tax bill. So you do have a separate fee for your police services budget. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the rate program, which is your water, wastewater, and storm, they're all recovered through user fees in terms of the amount of water that you use and that structure. Next slide, please. So again, from a citywide tax supported program perspective, the majority of the service does fall within the tax envelope, which is, again, as I mentioned, your roads, your parks, your recreational facilities, paramedics, public health, community social services, also gets funding from the province. These are all core services that are funded from the property tax that will be considered a citywide tax levy. Next slide. On the transit services and auto police services, so as I previously mentioned, the transit services does have its own levy. So the transit budget is funded from the transit tax levy and the user fares. As per our fiscal framework, which was approved by council back in 2007, 55% of the operating costs should be funded from the fare box, and then 45% should be funded from the transit levy. The actual is actually closer to 60% levy, 40% fare revenue. We do have federal and provincial funding that we get from the province and the feds, specifically provincial gas tax and federal gas tax. That funding gets reinvested into transit services. On the police side, again, they do have their own specific levy, and the police services budget does fall under the preview of the Police Services Act. That's a provincial legislation. So there's limited control in terms of the city, in terms of the control over that budget, because it's mandated by the Police Services Act. Next slide, please. On the rate side of the budget, so again, the rate program is recovered through user fees. So as I mentioned, we do have what we refer to as the water services, wastewater services, and stormwater. It is a very capital intensive program. Obviously, most of the infrastructure supporting those 3 services are very capital intensive. on all your pipe work, your road pipe sanitation facilities, water purification facilities, etc. So that program is funded through all the user fees related to those three services. This is not funded via the property tax bill. Next slide, please. User fees and charges. So user fees, there is another avenue for revenue that comes in. So I mentioned about 48 to 50% is from taxation. We do get a significant percentage from our user fees. So again, these are your transit fares, your recreational programs, building permits, parking permits, garbage fees, etc. Those are user fees, which we increase on an annual basis as well, which is another revenue source that we leverage to fund the overall city budget. Next slide, please. The next section I'll go through is basically a little bit of an overview of how the process works from a directions perspective, the engagement in terms of what happens at tabling, and then post-tabling into the final process of the adoption. I'll speak to some of the committee structure and how the budget book is kind of put together. I will speak to what I would view as significant changes for the budget this cycle, which you will see come tabling day. Talk a little bit to determine council priorities, and then give you a preview of what the planned meeting schedule is for the budget process. Next slide, please. So again, the budget process. The process doesn't start with the directions report. I can tell you that as soon as the budget was adopted in March, we immediately started the next process for this budget, the 2024 budget. It has been a little bit of a, I'll call it a crazy year with 2 budgets in 1 year. So we've been basically working on budgets every day for the past 300 plus days or more. And we start that process early in March, and then we kind of, is iteration after iteration, review after review. Formal budget directions basically provides what I would refer to as the bookends of the process for a finance team to work with the general managers to kind of give, what kind of parameters are we working with. And then we go into deep dive in terms of preparing all the documentation, all the investments, where the money is going to go, which we're three weeks from today, we will be tabling that budget. So the next 3 weeks is really the kind of burn and grind cycle of the process. We are trying to improve and increase public engagement. Immediately following the 23 budget process, I did meet individually with each councillor. We released a budget survey right after the 2023 budget process. We released another public survey about 4 or 5 weeks ago. We're doing this process here a little earlier. Typically, this consultation process starts post-tabling, so these are starting earlier this year, which is another kind of improvement in the process. And then I'll speak to a little bit, what happens on tabling day, after tabling day, and then when we get to the final adoption day. Next slide, please. So overall, the budget directions, the purpose of the budget directions, it does align to the term of council governance. And in terms of setting a direction for staff to kind of go away and come back and table a budget within those parameters. So the directions was approved at no more than 2.5%. And that was allocated across the board to the 3 levies, the police levy, the transit levy, and the tax supported services. The rate program is slated to increase at a combined 4.3%. Some services within water, wastewater, and stormwater increase at different levels, but overall it's 4.3% for the rate program. We are looking at significant new revenue ideas. I'll speak to it in one of the preceding slides. And then user fees and charges. The policy is supposed to be cost recovery. So every year we do look at our existing user fees to make sure that we are increasing to cover our costs. Next slide, please. So again, this is kind of a little bit of a continuum in terms of the different avenues of public engagement. If you've been out and about around the city, there is more advertising in terms of promoting the budget. If you're in our recreational facilities, you will see the budget 2024 icon rolling across the screen. If you went to our city hall, you can see it on the screen there. We are trying to do more outreach. We are, kind of marketing or publicizing our budget a little bit more. We're using different avenues. There's been more discussions ongoing. We're kind of leveraging the tools that we have to kind of promote the budget process more, which we're hoping to get more engagement and more feedback and ultimately improve the process moving forward. Next slide, please. So budget tabling adoption. So again, the budget will be tabled on November 8th. So we table on November 8th, that's when the documentation, the details are there. Immediately following that, we move into the committee reviews. I think transit is first on the docket, which I think is November 15th, the following Tuesday. The entire month of November is pretty much committee loaded in terms of the various different committees. Budgets will be presented at each committee, debate will occur, and then it will rise to council on December 6th for adoption. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of an overview of the committee structure. So our budget is broken down in terms of, we are structured in the city by department, and then each of the different departments do roll into different committees. So if you look at the transportation committee, you know, the bulk of that service is really within public works, a little bit from fleet, but this is where all the city services fall in terms of what committee they will fall and report to. And those respective committees have the authority to approve or amend the budget within that respective committee. Next slide, please. Budget announcements. So this year, we do have a number of improvements coming forward. There will be there's a couple of new products. One new product will be, we're what I'll call digitizing the budget. So for those that do look at the budget book, it is, you know, 12 to 1300 pages. It's a very detailed, lots of content in there, but very hard to navigate from a page flip perspective. We are moving that budget to be fully online. There will be an online link on ottawa.ca, and you'll have the flexibility and the ability to navigate, pivot, kind of navigate through the different components of the budget. Very user-friendly. Keep in mind, this is the first iteration, so this is the first time we've automated the budget process. We will be enhancing that as we move forward, but it is a significant change to what we've been historically used to receiving. Another product that we will be releasing as well is I've been calling it the magazine. So we do have an additional new product that will be accompanying the transmittal report on budget tabling. And in that details, we will be using more metrics, more KPIs, lots more graphics, trying to make the city services more digestible, more understandable, portray where the funding goes, give a sense in terms of the challenges that we face in our geographical city, which is very large. And then, you know, another thing that we did hold a technical briefing a few weeks back in terms of the budget 101. Next slide, please. Term of council priorities. So again, the term of council priorities were set in July timeframe. So what you're going to see in this budget is, again, a significant step forward in aligning the budget more linked to the term of council priorities. We will be doing some significant improvements on that linkage. More will come in the next cycle, just given the time that we've had. 2 budgets in 1 year, given the fact that the term of council priorities were only approved in July. So we have a strong link to the priorities to the budget, and you'll see that in the budget documentation throughout the various the products that we'll show in terms of, you know, budget tabling, committee presentation, etc. So we're really trying to link back the budget details to the priorities as much as we can. Next slide, please. And the last slide, as you can see, very, very congested month of November. It is pretty much, you know, not every day, but a lot, most every other day. Series of meetings. The budget tabling occurs on November 8th. The Ottawa Public Board of Health and the Ottawa Public Library, they are boards, they're separate boards, so they do table their budget a day or 2 days before us, and then the rest of the budget is tabled on November 8th, and then immediately following that, we move into the various committee reviews, followed by final day on December 6th. And that concludes the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Cyril and Suzanne, for that. Next, we're going to go through a few specific questions that are things we've heard from residents and things that each councillor has been working on in their offices. And then, as mentioned before, we're going to do a Q&A for any questions or comments. That'll be done using the raise hand function, but at any point, if you don't want to speak, You can use the chat function, or at any point you can email any of the offices and someone would be glad to reach out to you with responses to any questions. I think the first thing we'll go through is about the non-police crisis intervention line. So I know that Councillor Troster has been working a lot around this, and there's been a lot of feedback about the funding for it. Yearly, it's gonna be about $3 million for the pilot project right now. And a lot of people have been curious about where this money is coming from, how it's being funded. Councillor Troster, I don't know if you had anything specific you wanted to speak to with that.
Sure. What I can say for now is yes, the program will be $3 million a year for 3 years initially. My understanding is that will be funded from the existing community safety and wellbeing plan envelope. I know there's some examples of outreach services in Centertown that will likely be rolled into this pilot or replaced by this pilot, which will be available 24 hours a day. The intention is to have one number that you can call if you find a neighbor who's in distress, somebody who might be using drugs, somebody who might be having a mental health crisis, somebody who's just really unwell and who needs someone to check on them. All those situations where we pick up the phone and we need to figure out who the right person is to call. Right now, we have kind of a patchwork of services. They're not available all at the same time. They don't all go in the same area. There's many different phone numbers. We put together a who to call list in our office, which people have said has been helpful, but it's still kind of a laundry list. This will be one number, ideally something like 211. As I mentioned earlier, beyond the 3 years, if we're going to have a conversation about extending this alternative response across the whole city, which I believe is our intention to scale it in the future, that's when we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of where do we get this from? Does this require its own levy, or do we allocate this from what is existing police funding? So that's a conversation we're going to have going forward. The only thing I will say is that the preliminary studies and pilots from other cities show that these kinds of programs actually save cities a lot of money. It is a lot less expensive to be sending out professionals of this nature instead of police. It cuts down on a lot of interactions with the legal systems that might not be necessary. And also the intention is to get the right people doing the right job, helping people, helping to de-escalate conflict, and to free up police to be available for situations that really do present a physical threat to people. So that's what I have to say for now. I do have some concerns, though, that if this is going to be funded through the existing community safety and wellbeing initiative, I do worry that funding could be cut from one area to put into this pilot. So that will absolutely be something to keep a very, very close eye on, and that I know my office will be watching for.
Awesome, thank you. Another thing I know that's been really prevalent recently has been discussions around Lansdowne, the LRT and P3s in general. And those projects have pretty significant impacts on the city budget. And I'm not sure if Councillor Menard, you wanted to speak to that a bit, and how for you those projects have impacted the budget process, what the long-term impact is for residents.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Tessa. Yeah, the three largest sources of debt for the municipality on a project basis are LRT Stage 2, LRT Stage 1, and Lansdowne Park. They are all projects that are also public-private partnerships. And so we've transferred an enormous amount of wealth, public wealth, to the private sector for operating these facilities and systems. And as we've seen, we've taken a giant reputational hit on the LRT. We've had huge legal costs, which were not calculated initially on the public-private partnership for the LRT. It did not calculate the potential value of the risk. And they say that they reduce risks to the municipality. And of course, with Lansdowne, we saw numbers that said we were going to receive over $100 million in the waterfall distributions to the city. And we've seen none and are projected to see none under the Lansdowne 1.0 plan. So these have not panned out well for us. They have cost us a lot of money, quite frankly, and a lot of reputation. So I think the city has said in open session that they would not pursue a P3 for LRT Stage 3. We're nowhere near that in any event. We don't have any funding for it, and the province and federal government have not signaled that they would be funding that program to this point, and we are reliant completely at this point on that type of funding source. And we've just heard recently from the mayor and staff that one of the pressures that we're feeling on the transit system is as a result of the payments that we're now paying to RTG and RTM. And oftentimes when you're signing P3s, the best practice is to sign it for less than 30 years. Normally now they're saying, 10 years kind of max, because then you want renegotiation. We signed 30-year deal, a 26-year deal and a 30-year deal. And the payments that are there on the operation schedule are expensive. It's $5 million a month right now on stage 1, $4 to $5 million a month. And on stage 2, we've just gotten numbers in that'll be high value operational dollars as well. So, and of course, it comes with a lack of transparency and accountability when you're signing these deals. So, the city really needs to move away from public-private partnerships of this scale that has not benefited us and not served us well. It's been a prime example of why we should be moving away from it. And I believe in our staff. I believe in our city staff. We hire good people in good public sector jobs to carry out these sorts of things, rather than rely on companies that are out there to make a profit. So I'll leave it there and appreciate the question.
Awesome, thank you. And then a lot of people have reached out. I mean, people are constantly reaching out about transit. I think OC Transpo is probably one of the #1 things people hear about. And as Councillor Leeper mentioned in his opening comments, it's a big priority for his office. It's a big priority for plenty of offices. And I think a lot of people have just wanted to hear about what are the types of investments we should be making in transit, and what are the investments that could be a really good path forward. And I think that's something, Councillor Leeper, that you might want to speak to.
I am interested in speaking to transit for sure, because the future of transportation in Ottawa has to be a transit future. We can only rely on the private motor vehicle as a key form of transportation for, frankly, not very much longer. The city is going to come to a standstill. But if we're going to have a transit future, that transit has to be affordable, it has to be convenient, it has to be reliable. There are one of my biggest concerns, and I want to see how it's going to be addressed in this year's budget, is with respect to building the transit infrastructure that we need. And I'm not talking about LRT stage 3 here. I think Sean very accurately said there is no funding and no indication of funding that would be coming from the provincial or federal governments, and we need them to be the primary backers of this. But there's a lot of things like bus rapid transit infrastructure, priority bus measures, things that can help speed the bus along our increasingly congested street. And recently, I think everyone probably saw that there was a update from the city on its long-range financial plan for transit that indicated that over the course of the next 25 years, we're going to be $6.6 billion short on doing everything that we had suggested we wanted to do over the next 25 years. I just wanted to provide some insight into what some of those numbers actually mean, because they seem very large, $6.6 billion. Right now, we're counting on increasing the transit levy. So that's the portion of your property tax that you pay that gets devoted into transit of 3% per year. And if we continue to charge or increase the transit levy by 3% per year, we'll be in a $6.6 billion hole if we want to do everything that we want to do over the course of the next 25 years. If we were to charge 4% instead of 3% each year as a transit levy increase, that would raise an additional $2.78 billion. If our transit levy went up over the by the 5% over the course of the next 25 years, that would raise $5.9 billion. That hole starts to look a lot smaller if we start to shift more of the costs of the capital that we need onto the transit levy and less on the fare box, because obviously we're concerned about the cost of transit to pay into the fare box. So I think we have to have a conversation, and it really has to start with this budget, about increasing putting more of the cost of operating and building transit on the broader taxpayer. And that one is controversial. Not every councillor around the council table considers that that's an appropriate course of action. I think you'll find some flavor of the people who use the bus should pay for the bus in some quarters of the city, and we need to push back at that. One of the numbers that can help bring some of this into relief as well is with respect to the 2.5% fare increase that we are anticipating putting in place. A 2.5% fare increase brings us an additional $3.8 million. If we were not to charge a fare increase, 2.5%, to make up that $3.8 million by putting that on the transit levy, we'd have to increase the transit levy by 3.5%. as opposed to 2.5%. And that would cost the average property owner $8 per year. These are the kinds of numbers that we're looking at in terms of actual impact to Ottawa property taxpayers of doing the right thing and having the cost of operating transit spread more broadly across all residents of Ottawa. And it's the right thing to do because when transit works, it is to the benefit of all residents of Ottawa. There is an economic sustainability argument. There is an environmental sustainability argument for putting more of the cost of transit as a tax rather than as a part of the fare box. And the costs associated with increasing the transit levy in order to make up some of our infrastructure shortfall is also, I think, relatively minimal. The pushback that we're going to have is that there are going to be folks who believe that those who use the bus should pay for the bus. And that's something that, beginning in this budget cycle, we need to address head on. Thanks, Tess.
No worries. Thanks so much, Councillor Leeper. At this point, I think I'll pass it off to Miles, who will moderate a Q&A and comments for people. Again, that's using the raised hand function. So if you want to take it from there.
Thanks, Tess. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, please do raise your hand if you'd like to pose a question to either the councillors on the call or to the city staff that are on the call. I know some folks were having trouble seeing where the raised hand function was. It is under the reactions tab or button on Zoom. So hopefully you can find it there. If not, feel free to flag us in the chat. As was previously said, you're welcome to pose questions in the chat. I would advise that the best way to have your questions answered, if they're in written form, is to email them, because things do get lost in the chat, and this is a fleeting engagement we have here tonight. So I believe folks will have their councillor's email address if they are here already. We will post them in the chat once again. I do invite Cyril or Suzanne to put an email in the chat if there's one that people can use to reach staff directly on more technical questions that we'll be going to you with anyways. So please do so if you can. And yeah, so we'll go right ahead to the folks in queue here. What I'm going to do is ask you to unmute, and then you can make your comment or pose your question. If you feel like you want to identify specific people to answer the question you're posing, maybe it's your councillor or to city staff directly, just let us know, or let folks know when you're unmuted. So first I have Noel on my list. I'm asking you to unmute. Please go ahead, Noel.
Quick question in general finances. What is the cost of city debt as a percentage of city revenue?
Right now, it's about 5%, plus or minus. So just for context, provincial legislation in the province of Ontario states that municipalities need to have a debt of 25% is the ceiling from an own source revenue. City Council at Ottawa, City of Ottawa, they further refined that debt to 7.5%. And right now, I think we're roughly around 5%, plus or minus a couple of percentage points.
Thank you.
Thanks, Noel. And thanks, Cyril. We'll move to the next person in my queue here. I have Diane next. I'm asking you to unmute, Diane. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you for having this meeting. I have questions for a couple of people. Jeff, you said the province would react to asking them for funding for certain things, but there's only one taxpayer. I pay far more in provincial tax and federal tax than I have ever paid in city tax. And I live in the riding, Ariel's riding, that brings in the most revenue to the entire city. It's the highest revenue. So we need services, and the province needs to be asked. As I say, my provincial taxes are far higher and my federal taxes are far higher than my city taxes ever were when I owned a house in the Glebe. Second thing is, in terms of stormwater, when I owned a property in the Glebe, 2/3 of it.
I'm sorry, Diane. Can I just ask, you said there was a question, but I didn't identify a question there with respect to the province and taxes. I just want to be prepared to
I
answer.
don't think we should, it was really more a statement, I guess, Jeff. I don't think we should hesitate to go to the province and ask for some more money, especially, especially on things like housing and medical and so on.
Can I, Diane, if I could just respond to that before you move on to the next point. So many of you may have known that my previous career before I ran for office was at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And a lot of what FCM argues for are more direct transfers into big cities, specifically because I agree with you. A lot of funding gets stuck at the provincial level, and the government of the day will stick it on the deficit or use it for their own priorities. It's not filtering down. Earlier this year, we saw when the province was offering an increase in funding for homelessness relief, but gave the city an absolute pittance, and we had to raise hell, and then we eventually got our due, invested in a different project. It's like rattling the cage every time. It's like that on transit. It's like that on housing. It is enormously frustrating. And while I don't support the strong mayor powers, I support this growing movement for charter cities, which would see very direct transfers into cities for all the services that have been downloaded onto us, instead of us constantly having to ask, because we are asking, we're begging all the time.
Just further to that, property tax is a very regressive form of taxation. The little old lady in tennis shoes who's been in her house for 50 years, living on a fixed pension, is being asked to pay based on market value assessment. And let's face it, downtown, that is a huge assessment. And it's not proportional with the suburbs. It's much more expensive to buy a house in the city inner core than it is in the burbs. And so our taxes are much, much higher in downtown. I knew a lady who worked as a cleaner at the Chateau Laurier. Her husband died. She's in her 80s. She lives in the Glebe, and she's paying a fortune for taxes. Her income can't even cover it. So property taxes is a regressive form of taxation. We should be asking for the province and the feds for a piece of our federal income tax. That's far more fair. Second thing I just wanted to mention was in terms of stormwater, properties that have permeable surfaces, gardens, trees, non-concrete, and aren't built right to the edge of their property should not be taxed as much as those that build right to the edge of their property and have all that extra runoff into our stormwater. So I think that we have to really consider the pressure on sewers of some of these new builds that go right to the border of a property. I wanted to ask specifically to our finance people, the proportion of debt servicing that we're making for LRT, for Lansdowne, and for the new library. New library, I'm fine with that. We need a new library. I only wish it was at Lansdowne, quite frankly. I would like to know the total debt servicing, and I'm hoping in the detailed budget that you post online, you're actually going to show us the debt servicing costs. I do hope that's going to be there. We have made huge transfers to private interests on a lot of properties, and I personally think that's wrong. I'd also like to know exactly what has already been paid to consulting firms and to construction firms like Bird and so on, who've already started on LRT 3. Like, how much have we already paid? And how much are we paying to the lawyers, to the accountants, for all the financial reviews that we've had to do? I don't think those costs are being properly publicly shared, particularly with some of these P3 projects. So I really want to look into the finances, and I'm hoping that I can speak to you directly about that. And that's Cyril. I don't know if I could meet with you and ask you some specific questions. When I ran for mayor back in 1994, I went to the finance department and I asked a whole lot of questions. And they said, no other candidates asking these. And I said, well, what's wrong with them? Are they just going for photo ops? Because we have to understand the numbers. This is our money. It's our city. We are the taxpayers, and we must understand where every cent goes. I don't want to be 150 years old before the city debt is retired. And we have to understand that debt very carefully. And I'd like to understand what percentages we are paying on our debt, and to what extent we have a deal like Infrastructure Ontario, where some of these P3s get to actually do the financing. And I think that is part of the deal at Lansdowne. I believe they're getting 8% return on all their money. Meanwhile, we're servicing a huge debt. And I'd really like to understand those numbers deeply. Can those be provided? Those
Thank you.
numbers.
So what I would suggest,
Cyril, over to you. Yeah.
there's a lot there, obviously answers that I don't have on my fingertips. So probably the best would be probably send me an email with your questions.
Okay, you'll put your
I'll work-
email address somewhere publicly?
Yeah, I have no issue doing that. I'll do that in a sec.
Okay, I would actually like to have an interactive conversation with you so that I can follow up on questions, because if I send you an email and you send me an answer, how do I follow up?
Yeah, I'll send you my email.
Thank you very
I'm open
much.
to meet if there's any clarity needed.
Okay,
I will say though, please respect the time that I'm in right now in terms of we're going into a very, very deep dive busy process, but I will commit to getting your answers as soon as I can. It might be challenging to meet with me in the next few weeks given the budget cycle, but I'll certainly share
Okay.
my email right now.
I'm just of the mentality that you do not incur debt, and that's the only way to manage a budget. And we are incurring a lot of debt on behalf of private corporations. So that's it for now. But it's not the way I'd like to see my city's budget managed, with debt and debt servicing costs. And if you could provide the debt servicing costs for each of those outstanding debts, and the Lansdowne one is huge, the LRT one is huge, I think that should be made public. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Yeah, no, I think that those are really valuable questions, and I hope they got everybody else thinking too. Some of those costs are often obfuscated in all of this, right? So thanks so much, Diane. I'm going to move along to, and Cyril, I see you're going to put your email in the chat. Appreciate that. Next on my list is Eileen. Eileen, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thanks very much, everybody. And thank you for hosting the consultation this evening. I know you guys have lots of demands on your time. So I would like to make a couple of points. I don't have questions per se, just 4 points noted within the budget consultations. So as you know, I work at Ottawa Commission. I've worked there for almost 6 years. So a portion of what I have to say is housing was important to me on a professional basis, but also on a personal basis. I own a house in Intertown, as well as working at the mission. So in your deliberations, firstly, I have never seen things so bad in terms of quote unquote visible homelessness, either at the mission in terms of people living on the street in front of the mission, living in the Byward Market, and also as someone who has lived in West Centertown for the past 22 years, people living on the street in my neighborhood. I have never seen the level of homelessness. A lot of homelessness is invisible, but a lot of homelessness is quite visible. I have never seen the level of mental and psychological distress that is accompanying quote unquote visible homelessness. I understand from City of Ottawa numbers that about a year ago, the number of people estimated to be sleeping outside was about 210 people, which is obviously a public health emergency for obvious reasons. And now the figure is about 271 people. So the situation is getting worse, not better. So for me, both professionally as someone who has worked at the mission for almost 6 years, and also for me as someone who owns a home in Centertown, homelessness is a very distressing fact of life for increasing numbers of people in our community. And I would say there's a very thin line between who is homeless and who is not, particularly with people who have to renew their mortgages and also people who are looking at rents northward of $2,000 a month. One thing that is not widely disseminated is that 10% of people who live in shelters are actually working. They just can't afford $2,000+ a month for rent. It is disgraceful that anybody has to live in a homeless shelter. But I think it is a very glaring example of just the level of abysmal affordable housing, but also abysmal supportive housing for people who have mental health conditions, active substance use issues. So we need both affordable housing and supportive housing. We need that now. I was very happy to see new ground being broken earlier this week in my neighborhood for the next stage of the Gladstone development. But as Councillor Troster mentioned earlier, we have many projects that have lain undeveloped because there's no ability to move forward with them because there's no money. As someone who owns a house in West Centertown and has seen the value of my property appreciate, tenfold since I bought it, I would be delighted to pay more property taxes. Property taxes are a regressive form of raising money, but if that's the only lever, or one of the few levers that the city has to raise needed funds, then yes, by all means, raise my property taxes to 3.5, 4%. I believe that Toronto is paying somewhere around 5% property tax increase because they understand that they need the money. What I would say with regards to other issues, I've been a driver for almost 45 years. I went without a car for 4 years. I was looking forward to using public transit, and then I got stuck on the train not once, but 4 times for various service breakdowns. I have a number of buses that are accessible to me, but they are either crowded, they are late, etc. So out of a deep sense of frustration, particularly in the wintertime, I ended up buying a car. I would like not to be a car driver, but the public transit system is so broken now, and I live downtown and I am quote unquote able-bodied, so I can walk. But I don't want to walk to work for 45 minutes in the wintertime. That's not something I'm prepared to do. I would say that, the fallback position of the government for the past several years has been to go for the 3P model. It hasn't worked with regards to public transit. It didn't work for Lansdowne, which now we are facing horrendous levels of increase over the next few decades, which I certainly don't support. I would support more money for affordable housing. I don't support it for making a white elephant even bigger, aka Lansdowne. And as a side comment, I don't support it for the expansion of the Ottawa Hospital, which I gather we're stuck with that too, which is a deep disappointment to me. I worry that the decision for whatever reason to keep property tax increases at 2.5% will result in, I would say, matters of public safety. I live on a little tiny street, and it's actually dangerous for me to turn out of my street in the wintertime because snow berms are so appallingly not cleaned and sidewalks are not cleaned on this little tiny street that to make a left turn out of my street when I can't see over a snow berm. And I do worry about seniors have to walk, walking on streets that are not paved, walking on sidewalks that are not paved. So all of these decisions are as a result of decisions to keep property tax lower. Nobody likes paying property taxes, but I also don't like seeing services degraded or canceled altogether. So as someone who does pay property taxes, yes, I'm more than willing to pay more property taxes to improve and expand desperately needed public services. The last thing I will say, because I know a lot of people want to make additional comments, is, you know, I have been to many, many, many public consultations on budgets over, you know, a very long time, either as a volunteer, a private citizen, or as a representation or representative of a particular group. So I know there were promises to do budgets differently, and I know people have good intentions, but I do have to express my disappointment because I know people are exhausted when budgets are brought forward, they are confirmed. It's a lot of hard work with people with very good intentions, and I don't want to minimize that. But looking at when the draft budget, which will be delivered on November the 8th, is supposed to come before various committees, you know, unless I misread the slide, it says the Community and Social Services Committee is going to meet on November the 28th, and the Planning and Housing Committee is going to meet on November the 29th, and then the budget will be delivered a week later. The budget has to be refined, it has to be checked, it has to be translated. And I mean, I recall the budget process for the budget earlier this year. I think Housing and Planning Committee met the day before the confirmed budget was supposed to be disapproved. So I'm not minimizing the amount of work, the amount of stress being involved, but if you want people to come forward, have a consultation process that allows for what they bring forward to be considered, to be reflected upon, and hopefully to be incorporated in what the final budget will actually look like. I find it hard to believe that if someone comes forward with comments a week to 10 days in advance, that they will actually be considered in any meaningful way. And I'm not being cynical when I say that. Formatting a document that is over 1,000 pages long. So thank you for your attention, and I'll conclude my remarks with that.
Thanks, Eileen. Those are great comments. I will ask for folks commenting moving forward to try to be more concise. I appreciated everything you said, Eileen, believe me, but we do have hands up and a time limit. So I'm going to move right ahead unless somebody really wants to jump in and comment in response. You can stop me, but otherwise I'm going to go right ahead to Angela Keller-Herzog. Angela, I'm asking you to unmute.
Okay, thanks very much, Miles. Just quickly, I'd like to strongly support what Eileen was saying. In terms of people living like with addiction on the street in abject poverty in our city, and that these numbers are increasing year on year on year is just nuts. And I honestly think that, like, if priority was put on that, it would like, this is a problem that is fixable. Not to say it's easy, but it is fixable. So I have a question for the counselors. Where do you think are some unnecessary expenditures? Like, where do you think we could do things like better, more smarter, like restructure, or just simply not spend it on that? Because I think obviously we need to have some things that are deprioritized if we want to see other things rise to the fore. So that's one question. And then I've got a couple of questions for Cyril. I'm wondering where we could get like a head count in terms of what's happening with city staff. I think that there's an FTE report that comes out, but I think that all the temporary staff that kind of get hired on and then gradually get in, like where do you get a sense of just how many people? Because I think the city staff is really growing. And also, third request on the Cyril side, where do we find data on parking? Like, how has parking rates increased over time? How has parking revenue increased? And how is this in proportion with other things? And if just in sense of time, if Cyril, if you want to respond in the chat, that would be fully appreciated.
Okay,
Well, I
thanks,
think I can
Angela.
go, oh, sorry. I think I can be quick, Miles. If that's okay, if it's okay
Please,
for me.
please.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, when we do table, you're right, Angela, we do have a, what we call an FT analysis report. So that's part of the report that accompanies the budget documents, and that does provide an overview of the FTEs on the permanent side of the equation. The temporary ones has been a bit of a challenge, and rightfully so in the past 3 years throughout the pandemic. Our entire organization was turned upside down. Everybody was shifted. OPH hired over 3,000 temporary staff. We are, we're going through the process and untangling that and kind of clean that up. So the temporary one is a bit harder to refine, but we're working on that. On the parking, you will see that in the user fee schedule. So we do show the current year increases plus the prior 2-year rates. So you will see that. And the beauty of the online budget tool that you will see will be basically probably within 3 clicks, you can add that information in front of you. So that'll be readily available once that goes up on November 8th.
Which schedule is it in?
It's what we refer to as a user fee schedules.
Okay.
And that's within the parking. There's a parking department services section, and it'll be right there.
Okay, and I know you had a question in there for the counselors as well at the outset. Is someone on the counselor side wanting to comment?
Yeah, I can take that one. Sean already mentioned it. I think we are reviewing the grants that go to developers, like the Brownfields program, for example. And some of these community improvement plans. I mean, we saw in the last term a giant multi-million-dollar grant going to a Porsche dealership. These are not the businesses that need our subsidies, so I think we should be looking at that. I think we should be looking at alternative sources of revenues, for example, greater fees for ride-sharing services. Right now, for example, when you take a taxi, a taxi driver is charged more than an Uber driver is in terms of fees coming back to the city. We want to disincentivize car travel, even if it's Uber car travel, and that money can be invested in transit. And the debt that we're servicing, the P3s that we're dealing with, all the consultants, all the lawyers, all the lawsuits that are currently happening with companies like RTG, those things can be easily avoided if we invest in public assets that are delivered publicly. So, some of those things are very hard to undo, as Councillor Menard mentioned, a 30-year maintenance contract. And I have to tell you, when we first met as a council, we learned also the problem with some of these LRT systems is there are very few people in the world who know how to run and to maintain them. It is very hard to develop in-house expertise on these things. To which I say, well, let's start now. So maybe 5 or 10 years down the line, we're in a better position. And then, of course, the other thing I'll say is the money that we're spending on temporary motels to house entire families, what we're spending on shelter, what we're spending on policing of poverty and homelessness and the drug crisis. Permanent, supportive, and affordable housing is cheaper at the end of the day. It's a bigger upfront investment, but then it saves our city money. So I really want us to be making those smart investments in people and in the services and the supports that people need, because it will ultimately save us money. Right now, we're constantly playing whack-a-mole when it comes to things like shelters, for example. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, folks. I have Elaine McGregor next. And
Oh,
Mike,
sorry,
I'm gonna
Miles,
ask
if
you
I
to
may.
Oh, please go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no worries. We can always identify specific line items that are suboptimal ways of spending taxpayer money. I want to make sure that we are constantly keeping the bigger systemic issue in mind, though, which is that we are paying for decades of sprawl. Our budget would be in much different shape today had, city governments and provincial governments over the course of the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s not perpetuated sprawl, those kilometers of road that are far flung from our denser neighborhoods cost a lot of money to plow per person. It costs a lot of money to serve a neighborhood of detached homes with a bus route. There's always line items in a budget where we can argue about whether or not we should spend the money on them. But I would hope we have reached the point, and I think we have right across North America, of understanding that the biggest drain on municipal finances is the cost of sprawl. the most important way to counter that is through intensification. That's a big systemic answer to your question, Angela, but I think it's a really critical one. We can stop those unnecessary expenses today, but unfortunately, it will probably be our kids and our grandkids who reap the real benefits of a more financially sustainable city.
Right.
Wow, thank you.
Good. Thanks, Angela. Okay, Elaine McGregor, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. I have one comment and one question. My comment is that based on what I've been seeing about riding on the buses lately, we desperately need to not cut anymore, because I remember 2011. I remember how badly things failed in 2011, and we are already in a failing situation, and we can't. It's so bad already, and particularly at rush hour, that we can't reduce the service any further. It's just not, we're not capable. People will stop using it, just like Eileen mentioned earlier. And it's really not acceptable. My question is for Mr. Rogers. I want to know how much the city is spending on advertising on social media, Facebook, X, Reddit, YouTube, all the social media, specifically for this budget, and then also yearly, in general, yearly.
Yeah, so my answer will be get back to me or send me an email. Obviously, that's a pretty detailed question, but I can certainly dig that up relatively quick tomorrow. And so if you send me an email, I put in my chat there, I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add that I think I would note that this money goes straight out of the city. There's no multiplier effect. There's nothing there. We're just basically sending it to very, very rich people in the US or otherwise, and it's not benefiting the city. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Roland, I have you next in my queue here. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Roland, you're going to be prompted to unmute. I'm going to ask again.
There we go. Thank you very much, Miles. I will be brief, hopefully, said he. My main interest at the moment is on budget transparency, and anything that can be done to improve the transparency of the budget is a good thing. And one of the things, Cyril, that you mentioned is plan to link term of council priorities to the budget. And my first related question of 2 or 3 is, are there any public consultations with respect to the term of council priorities and their establishment? And if not, why not?
So that was basically released back in June, July. So from my perspective, I'm going to speak from my perspective, the term of council priorities is not under my direction. I obviously support it from the financial side. And there was, to my awareness, I don't think there was consultation on that. The councillors may have done something individually, but I don't think there was a public outreach as we do with the budget, like for the term of council priorities.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, Cyril. And it's a question really about going forward than it is going backward. I understand that for 2023 budget, there were constraints and limitations in that regard, but I'd certainly be interested in the thoughts of the 3 councillors who are here as to whether they see public consultation on term of council priorities going forward as a good idea, or one that they would support or not. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is also related to that, and that is, are there any benchmarks, any metrics at all in terms of being able to measure what progress is being made or not made with respect to the term of council priorities?
Yeah, I'll hand that over to one or more councillors to answer. Is there anybody in
I'm happy,
particular?
Miles, to just, yeah, thanks so much, Miles. Happy to jump in here. I would, of course, support improvements to public consultation. This is a long-standing issue in the city and needs to be improved when it comes to not just listening to resident voices, but of course incorporating the feedback that is received. I think that as we heard it, reports have been helpful, but too often we're still seeing things that are in there that aren't being incorporated into the design and makeup of final decisions and outcomes. So absolutely understandable when it comes to that request. And I'm sorry, the second part of your question was?
with respect to
Benchmarks.
benchmarks and metrics, and whether there are
Yeah.
any that enable us to track progress or not.
Yeah, so there are benchmarks now in the term of council priorities. Whether or not they're the right ones might be a question for folks, but we do have benchmarks in there for each of those priorities. And so some of those metrics will be helpful for evaluating the priorities that we've set.
John, have there been any public consultations on those metrics and benchmarks?
The only the only thing that I would say is I guess that was released prior to decision and people could write into their councillors, but I don't believe there was a full session to consult on them. So I think an improvement in governance definitely something that would be helpful.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Many
I mean, I will say, I do think the exercise was sort of freshly after folks were elected. So I think it was also an opportunity for councillors to share with each other what we heard from residents through the many month-long process of knocking on doors and talking to people. And then I think the intention was to consult out when it came to drafting an actual budget. But your point is well taken. It was my first time as a councillor engaging in an exercise, and it really amounted to some conversations and getting to know each other and getting to understand what we're hearing from residents in our wards, which are all many of them are very different from each other.
If I can have just one last short comment, and that is the reason why I'm focusing on term of council priorities is because I see the budget as basically a values statement. It's a reflection of council's values. And so how it spends our money is in essence a reflection of that. And to the best of my knowledge, there really hasn't been or any kind of extensive discussion that links the budget with our values, that enables us to track from year to year why the money is being spent the way it is compared to the previous year or going forward in the next year.
So if I can add just a couple points of additional information. Are you okay, Jeff, or Councillor Leaper?
Yeah, no, please go ahead. But I would like to get a word in for sure.
Sorry. Yeah, because it's important because so the term of council priorities, they do have a long list. I think there's about 58, 60 different identifiers that we're going to track against. What you're going to see in this budget in one of the new documents is the introduction of more KPIs, more performance indicators and metrics. The next budget cycle will then be beefed up quite a bit. The first report back on the term of council priorities comes in June of 2024, I believe, as we go through a cycle. So basically, again, the budget documents is one step this time, and that the next cycle will be very much more exhaustive in terms of more KPIs, more metrics, and more tracking. Sorry, Councillor Leaper.
No, that's okay. So again, I'm kind of an outlier on this one, as I often am. The term of council priorities. Sorry, Cyril, you just said how many items there were in there. It is dozens and dozens and dozens of items, and that's no priority at all. As a councillor, if I have choices about how to advocate for the allocation of resources and time, and we only have two resources, money and time. If I have to choose between how I'm going to allocate those, I cannot do it with the term of council's priority document that is 60 items long. I heard at the door, and I've heard over the course of the last several years, the strong priority that residents have put, the clear priority that people have put on housing and transit. And that really helps me when we have scarce resources to determine how the money that we have should be spent. If there's wiggle room that's created because we stop spending on something, I want that money spent on housing and transit. If we have the opportunity to add more money into the budget, I want it spent on housing and transit. And that may not be everybody's priority. I hear a lot about obviously environmental related and climate change related initiatives that people would like to do. I hear a lot about parks and recreation, but what I hear very consistently 365 days a year from residents through the course of receiving emails and phone calls, from going to community association meetings, at my pop-up meetings tomorrow from 1 until 4 at the Cupcake Lounge at 343 Richmond Road. You know, I hear what people have to say, and to my mind, there are only two key priorities that everyone would agree should be spent on ahead of everything else, and that's housing and transit. Now, if I'm wrong, on that. If I should be trying to spend money in a lot of other different ways that I've mistook the ward's priorities, you'll throw me out, and that's fine. But I went to the door with an explanation of what my priorities were, and I had really good discussions around those priorities, and I think I'm right. We all think we're right. I think I'm right when I say if we've got $1 to spend, I want it spent on housing or transit ahead of everything else. We do have excellent KPIs on housing and transit. And we'll understand whether or not we're providing better service or worse service, whether things are getting better or worse. But I'm less focused on a document that is 60 to 80 priorities long and trying to develop KPIs for each of those. At that point, that's a great bureaucratic exercise. It's not a very good exercise for a politician who's been elected with an agenda that they've been transparent with in the course of an election.
Right on. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, everyone. Peter Zanetti, I see you next. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Keep the dad jokes to a minimum, my friend.
Hello, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Thank you. I raised this issue because I informed City Council in June of 2021 in an open letter. At that time, Councillors Leeper and Menard were in that council, Councillor McKenney as well, and Councillor Trottier was a staff person of Councillor McKenney. My concern as a openly gay man, I am still frustrated that the city is still funding organizations. I have to be specific, like Chamberfest, that still continue to deny wearing a rainbow sticker or button on myself while performing my duties as a volunteer. I am frustrated that organizations that have a similar policy, a don't show gay policy, or any don't show diversity policy should be defunded from the city. This is a value statement. This is a health and safety. In a arts debate prior during the last election, candidate Sutcliffe at the time did indicate that anybody should be able to wear a rainbow pin while you're working, volunteering anywhere in Ottawa. It was at Arts Court. I'm still frustrated that there's still no action on this issue in enforcing organizations that are being financed by the city that have, in my case, a don't show queer policy. Judge me on my actions, not on my identity displayed. I don't want to go down the road of an S21 in Quebec, okay? This is kind of what it's, I'm seeing that parallel. If we're supposed to be a safe and inclusive city, that safety and inclusivity also happens when volunteering and or working in organizations that are being funded by the same city. Another funding cycle is going through. Here we go again. I'm waiting. I want to see something across the board. So I don't have to call an organization and say, hi, can I wear a rainbow pin? Or if I can wear a yellow ribbon for a cancer survivor, all right? It's inclusivity, safety begins at home in our own backyard. We went through a convoy crisis, and we have to also ensure that we are safe and inclusive, as taxpayers and volunteers giving our time in helping make the city a better space.
Peter, and I agree entirely with your points. I've raised it on a couple of occasions with staff, and they've agreed that there has to be a festival funding policy that speaks to creating the safe space for volunteers that you've identified on a few occasions. That is taking more time. You have reminded me that is a discussion that I had with them many months ago, and my commitment to you. I know some of my staff are on the call right now. my commitment to you is to follow up with them this week and find out where that policy is, because you are right, we have to have one. And how taxpayer dollars are spent on festivals should be dependent on the degree to which they're willing to create safe spaces for the talent, for the volunteers, and for the attendees. So thank you for raising it again tonight.
I'll be quick on the follow-up, if I may. If I'm going to be I guess I can call it a complainer, right? If that, using a small C word, I like to be a contributor to this process of developing that policy. I worked out something of what I think may work, but I don't know until I have communication with city staff or whatever about this. So please include me, and I'm not saying just the me, there are other queer people across the city who would like to be included and consulted on, or the diversity part of this whole thing, because it's one thing to be, but if there's no venue for me to contribute, that is also frustrating, okay, or to consult and to see this through, that we have a thorough discussion and a thorough thing that we could walk it through, that's navigatable, etc., by all parties concerned, right? And so that's the process I like to see here. Because what started as a me issue, what happened to me, should involve diversity across the board of all enumerated grounds of the Human Rights Code that we live in Ontario, that were so long and hard fought for a good reason, whether it's person of faith, person of ethnicity, of health status, etc., etc., etc. And this is where I've been advocating for years, but I want to work with you somehow, and I'm sort of, forgive my frustration.
But Council Leaper will follow up, Peter, and I think putting you in touch with the staff making these policies and decisions makes a lot of sense. It's something we often do.
Peter, I do. Yeah, and I do understand I do understand what you're seeking, which is the involvement of the people who are most affected by the policies, to ensure that you have an opportunity to provide that input before it becomes a policy. So you've got my commitment to trying to ensure that as well.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Good to see you tonight. Cheryl, I have you next on my queue here. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please go ahead. See, you've unmuted, Cheryl? Or
I think I am now. Yeah.
I can hear you.
There was a message came up that confused me. So I have concerns about both bylaw services and also road infrastructure. So in Hintonburg, we've got crumbling sidewalks that are dangerous. We put in requests, we put in pictures, we put in the spring some geo mapping, and sometimes a little bit happens, but it always falls further behind. And we've got broken bollards with jagged metal sticking up. And I haven't found an effective way of getting anything to happen on those. So I've tried emailing, the head of roads. We tried getting them out on a walkabout. I've taken photos and tried to email 311 because calling 311 never seems to result in anything. It's not something that there's a service request, an automatic service request for. So it's extremely frustrating in terms of that, trying to get anything to happen on that. The other concern I have is bylaw. In terms of weeds, some of our vacant properties and some properties that are not vacant, the weeds are easily 5 feet high. And again, trying to get something to happen on that has been just most frustrating. So I don't know whether this is a budget problem or whether this is a resourcing problem or a bit of both. Are there not enough, say, inspectors on both of those issues to go out and look at the problem? Is there not enough money to fix the crumbling sidewalks? Is it you just don't have the people to even get to it? I don't know what that is.
Cheryl, just briefly on the vacant property that has property standards issue. We do have a new permit system for our vacant buildings. And it would be
Cheryl
good
knows.
to reach out and ensure that it's on the vacant building list. That's a
Oh,
permit
yeah,
system that
that's,
allows for more proactive enforcement
yeah,
now.
yeah, no,
Not
I've
really a
sent
budget
that to
question,
the
but
tax department, I've sent it to bylaw. But bylaw can't seem to keep up, and I realize that they've got a lot more properties on the vacant property list than they assumed they had by like triple. So I realize they're struggling a bit. But yeah, no, I've I've done a ride around with bylaw, and we have another one hopefully coming up. But still, everything seems to be falling further behind than it ever has before. So some of the properties with multiple complaints that are on the vacant property list that are also supposed to have vacant property permits, the weeds are 5 feet high. So it's just, there's difficulty. I understand it's a new process, but it's not working. And the sidewalks, they're crumbling year after year. So we need to figure out what's going on. And I would make a suggestion in terms of some efficiencies would be somehow figuring out the complaint process, because it doesn't work very well at all. So calling 311 is very painful. Sometimes it's a 45-minute wait to get through. The service request automated system that you have, if it doesn't fit in that pigeonhole, it kicks it out. If you do get it through, you never get a reply back. They clear the call, they say it's closed, but nothing's happened. Emailing 311, you at least, get a service request number in about 5 days. And then sometimes you get a call back, but it's not working very well. And I think, in one case, I had to call 311 every day. So that's a waste of my time. It's a waste of your 311 operator's time, who couldn't tell me why nothing was happening. It was only through Councillor Leeper's office that I understood. It still took 2 weeks to get the issue dealt with. So I think that could be streamlined. So that's just a suggestion for you. Thank you.
okay.
Cheryl, I don't think there's anyone on the call tonight who can tell you whether it's a resource issue or not, because you had asked that. My assertion is that it is. And I've put that assertion to Cyril. I've put that assertion to the city manager in strong terms. The one thing I don't know, Cyril, whether you're comfortable answering it tonight or not, in my discussions about crumbling sidewalk infrastructure, I raised concerns that in this term of council, we've determined to cap our tax increase at 2.5%. In the last term of council, we raised taxes by 3%, and 1/3 of those additional revenues were earmarked for infrastructure renewal. I think you told me, or maybe Wendy told me in this term of council, even though the tax cap is 2.5%, that staff's intention is to continue spending at an equal, if not higher level on infrastructure renewal. Did I mishear that?
No, that's correct. I just a quick, Miles, my internet connections have been coming and going the last 5 minutes. So if I do cut out, let me know. No, that's right, Councillor. So basically, we are still on track in closing the infrastructure gap by 2026. In 2023, there was a one-time $30 million increase investment into roads infrastructure. We did also add $1 million for sidewalks. It's something that I've been working really closely with Tammy and the infrastructure team and trying to figure out how to improve the sidewalks, because we do hear that frequently pretty much across the city.
I'm going to come back to the big system.
We are continuing to invest in the infrastructure for sure.
My concern, of course, is that with maintained spend on the infrastructure within the context of a lower cap, that it's other areas where there may be fewer resources available, right? That's one of those priorities questions, I guess, that comes up. And I'll just continue to paint the bigger picture, which is that if people can't walk to where they need to go, and if transit is broken, it just means more people driving on our streets, which we absolutely cannot afford. So, but I know I've passed that on to you before. So
Thank you so much. There is a concurrent process that's ongoing right now. I'll just mention, Cheryl, in relation to some of your comments, it's the service review that the city's doing for issues that are not, funding related, perhaps. That might be a process to weigh in on. I know the mayor is taking a lead role in that, and I think it's Councillors Carr and Curry that are on the councillors group sponsoring that. So just flagging that. Okay, we have 2 speakers left, folks. We have budgeted till 9 p.m. So we're well on time here, which is great. Andrea, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I just want to ask really quickly if Gabe, the next person, is involved with the Ottawa Arts Council at all, just because I don't want to duplicate things. Okay. So I discovered this session tonight, thankfully, through a post from the Ottawa Arts Council regarding arts and culture in Ottawa and the funding that is lacking. And I had reached out to Sean Menard. I appreciate how much work that is being done with Lansdowne. I run Wall Candy, which is a company that does art events for artists, and I work closely with the arts community. And we rent the city building, the horticulture building in Lansdowne Park, and the planning for it is currently unsustainable in terms of the cost. So the reason I had reached out to City Council was to see if I could get a break on pricing, so something, some sort of a reduced rate. This is something that I'm in discussion with other stakeholders in the arts community, and it just seems like the city isn't able to accommodate that. So I guess I wanted to ask all the councillors if there's any insights on how the City of Ottawa is going to budget, even if it's through the reduction of costs, so not adding extra money, although obviously that's very important, but through some sort of either subsidy or price break for arts and culture organizations.
And I'll pick that one up just because Tessa Franklin from my office, who facilitated the beginning of this meeting, has actually been working very hard on this file. So I'll throw to her in a second. I'll just say that Councillor King and I added arts and culture to one of the elements of council priorities because there was no mention of it there when we voted on the priorities. And I've also been in touch with a number of festivals and arts institutions who raised the exact issue that you do, which is the very cost of facility rentals from our own city is becoming unsustainable. And that's something that that's like a low hanging fruit for the city to be able to help the arts. But also, Tess will speak to this in the SAC. I'm aware of the Ottawa Arts Council's asks, and I think it's entirely reasonable to ask for the 2.5% at a minimum. That is supposed to be the raise to city services, because I was really shocked to find out through a bunch of other arts organizations that they have either not seen raises at all, or they have not seen raises that are equal to what the property tax increase is. So I'll pass it over to Tess, who's been working on this.
Like Ariel just mentioned, we did receive today from the Coalition of Cultural Organizations, including the Ottawa Arts Council and OMIC and lots of awesome folks there. We did receive the budget requests. We are actively working on all of the ones that are involved in the Culture Counts campaign. And we are intending to see what we can do ahead of budget. As far as the facility rentals, you are not the first person or organization to mention this. We've had a lot of folks in our ward, a lot of nonprofit arts organizations mention this, and this is also something that we're looking at bringing ahead of budget to see what we can do, because the increases this year are unsustainable for arts organizations, pretty much full stop. There are several organizations, at least in our ward, that will simply cease to exist if this happens. So it is something we're working on, and I would encourage you to reach out if you want to connect and talk about this further. Especially with the cultural funding framework coming up. This is a file our office is really active on, and I have a long history as a culture sector worker, so I'd love to connect with you and talk further. But I do want to reassure you that we're making moves, we're making things happen.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for your response. I think that there is something perhaps that the city could literally do right away. For example, with my particular event, I work with a community of over 200 artists. We run 2 events. And right now, the rental fee for the horticulture building is coming in at $11,000. We can't just make that out of thin air. Not to mention that for an art show, you need grids, and that's another 10 grand. So it's a really expensive show to pull off. And I beseeched the city to please help. I reached out to Mayor Sutcliffe and to Sean Menard and got back a bit of a resistant response from, I'm not sure exactly who in their office, but, and was offered $500 as a stipend, which is just kind of unacceptable. So I am in touch with the New Art Festival as well. And the organizer has also prepared a statement, which I'm happy to share, or I can send it to you, Tessa. But basically there's quite a bit of frustration, and a lot of us, including myself, volunteer their time. We're not able to pay ourselves a salary, which is completely unsustainable, which means you're not able to have art organizers prepare these types of events, which means that artists have less opportunities to sell and to show their work. So it's a bit frustrating for the arts community because people like myself can't really move forward. And despite asking and begging the city to please give us help, that's not happened, and it can still happen. I know that Sean Menard is on the call, so maybe he would like to weigh in on possibly giving us some sort of a reduction on that rental. Anyway, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for coming out.
Sean?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say thanks for being here. Certainly, I wish we controlled the rent and the reductions, but that's not us, certainly. And I know the mayor's office may have got back to you, and I'm not sure if there was a curt response there, but I know our office is happy to work with you to try to work with city staff. And just given the important work you do, just happy to keep dialogue open on this issue. So please keep working with us, Andrea, and we're there to help wherever we can. And we don't control those things, unfortunately, but definitely want to assist you wherever we can. So thanks for doing that. I know Miles on the call is in our office too, and you can follow up directly with our team so that we can keep chatting on it.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I was just about to say, Andrea, I'm going to drop my email into the chat. I haven't been looped in on this yet. And please do send me an email and we can see what we can do. Thanks again. Okay, I have Gabe next. Gabe, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please go ahead.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, thanks for doing this. I'm no longer in Sean or Jeff's ward, but I figured I'd pop in on this anyway. Just a couple of things. One, definitely want to voice my opposition to whatever proposal is on the table for Lansdowne. My son and I spent hundreds of hours there, and I have more opinions than I will share tonight. Just want to say that. I guess a couple of things are, I definitely agree with affordable housing and transit as being like the priorities that have to somehow stay at the top. I'm not really hearing a lot of the inverse kind of perhaps incentives or push. And by that, I mean, the mayor spent all summer talking about a little stretch of road that was closed, the, havoc that apparently wreaked on the downtown, but public transit basically has been completely absent from that conversation somehow. But I guess, so I have a couple of things. One is there a mechanism to put a moratorium on all new road construction? Because, I mean, if this is an affordability issue in terms of housing, and I would argue transportation, because I think mortgage, rent, and car ownership are probably the 3 biggest expenses in a household. That it would strike me that at a municipal level, what municipalities seem to have as a lever that they can activate to make life more affordable is to allow more households to get rid of at least one car. I've lived in multiple parts of the city. There are many single family homes that have 2 to 3, even 4 vehicles in them. And I think that that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit to be able to get more cars off the road, because the conversation is centered around public servants, and it's a government issue that public servants aren't taking transit. Whereas I think the issue is that Ottawa residents aren't taking transit, because as a transit user and as someone who's not owned a car in Ottawa since 2020, and as a dad to a 4-year-old, I fully understand why people have purchased vehicles. So I guess, yeah, my question, two questions are about, like, is there a lever to put new road construction money into transit? Because I'm still unclear as to like how the big budget hole that apparently the feds are supposed to fill with us is, like, what's happening there. And I don't understand why like 2 to 3 years worth of new road construction money can't be put to fund transit. Maybe there's mechanisms there that I don't understand, and I assume that there are. The second thing would be, are there mechanisms or levers that municipalities have to incentivize people to get rid of vehicles? Like, there's 460,000 households in Ottawa, roughly 461. I just looked it up this evening. Let's assume that 100,000 households don't own cars. That's insane number, because it's definitely more than that. But I don't understand why the city is not setting a KPI, because it's a pretty measurable one, to get 20, 30, 40,000 cars off the road, which would be how many households in Ottawa to get rid of one vehicle. Because that seems like the lowest hanging fruit. And you get people out of their vehicle and taking transit to live their life, not just for federal public servants to be able to get to their job 5 days a week. Anyway, those are a couple of my thoughts and just kind of questions I have. Thanks.
Yeah, if I may, I think the biggest incentive we have to get people out of their cars is to provide them with the alternative that I think a lot of people want. There's a lot of reluctant drivers out there. I'm one of them. Love hitting the open road, and love driving down the Trans-Canada out west, but I don't like driving in the city. And oftentimes I feel like as though I don't have a choice, because we don't have affordable, convenient, reliable transit and the adequate safe cycling infrastructure. Both of those are, I think, the key incentive that we can provide people to make transit and active transportation a first choice. You know, we're probably, as a municipality, with the various tools and resources at our disposal under the Municipal Act, probably not going to pay people and cut checks to give them, to get them to incentivize to get rid of their car. But one of the key things that a municipality can do is build safe infrastructure and great transit. That's well within our purview. We do need the help. I don't want to. I don't want Mayor Sutcliffe to hear the message that, you know, we just have to raise our taxes as much as it takes to do that. We need help as do all municipalities across Canada, from other levels of government who have much less, to Diane's very original point a couple of hours ago, who have access to tax resources that are nowhere near as regressive as ours. We should be doing like Toronto has done, and looking at other tools like sales taxes, but it's certainly incumbent on us, I think, to do more as a municipality. With respect to new road building, I think council can always say, yeah, we're not going to build a road. Most new roads are built with development charges, and the development charge regime is heavily statutorily constrained. And if anyone wants to read probably one of the most important documents in the city that no one ever reads, it's the development charges background study that leads to the development charges bylaw. That's really critical reading for anyone who wants to understand how the provincial policy statement rolls into the official plan, rolls into the transportation master plan, the infrastructure master plan, the parks and rec master plan, that lead to capital projects that then get funded through development charges. It's all very elegant on paper, but it's not well understood by residents. And the great place to start is the development charges background study. Awesome document.
Can I just say one quick thing, because I know we're running late, but I also need to remind you that when we go to council, if I even want to close a road for like pride, I have to go to 24 other councillors and get them to vote on that. Other cities, like, or other provinces, Montreal has a borough system where local roads are controlled by the local borough, which allows them to make very localized decisions. I was recently on the radio with David Brown, who's a councillor for Rideau Jock, which is an hour's drive away. They said, what are your priorities for your residents? He said, roads and policing. And I said, housing and transit. So the reality is we are governing a city that was amalgamated by force, and this is what we've inherited. And so I did have a conversation with the mayor the other day about, can we think about maybe decentralizing some of this decision making so the urban core can have money that's allocated to urban priorities, and so that we can make those decisions more locally? I mean, that's something to think about in the future when it comes to governance of our city, because truly, I know what urban inside the Greenbelt residents are saying, and it's very different from what rural and suburban residents are saying, and we are outnumbered on council. We just are. So we do a lot of trying to persuade each other, but the numbers just aren't there.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Gabe. I have one last question, and we are pretty much out of time, so it's actually kind of perfect timing. Nicholas, I'm going to ask you to unmute. Please go ahead, and we'll finish with you.
Hey, yeah, I wanted to talk mainly about the traffic calming budget. It's seems very, very small, like 62,000 per ward. That's absolutely nothing. That's less than the cost of a single car, which is kind of ridiculous.
Is that the temporary? Are you looking at the temporary traffic
Yeah,
calming
the
budget?
temporary. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because that's the fastest from what I've heard to get implemented. But yeah, this isn't really an expensive problem to solve. Like, even just letting residents themselves, I think the best would be if residents themselves could contribute to this kind of stuff themselves, and also improve the streetscape, adding planters and adding public art to the streets. Just any kind of decoration or yeah, addition to the street, they'll slow down cars. But if you can't allow that for some reason, for safety or liability stuff, at the very least, it could be good to let residents fund this stuff themselves, because there's so much demand for safer streets here. Every single street I go down here, there's signs saying slow down for our kids. Everyone wants safer streets in the city, but the amount of money being allocated to it is tiny. Like, if you were to put the cost of one off ramp on the highway into this for a single year, you'd have a massive reduction in the number of people killed. People would feel much safer going out in the street, and tons of benefits for everybody. Yeah, I'd really like to see this number go up, because this is not an expensive problem to solve. Tons of cities around the world are making a lot of progress on this, and relative to the entire budget, it's literally nothing right now in the temporary traffic calming, at least. And I'm also just very confused about how, even in a lot of the suburban wards, the councillors will say that their priorities for this term are transit and housing, and yet we're cutting our transit budget, and the affordable housing budget, I think, is 15 million, which is not enough to do really anything at all. It's not going to really move the needle at all on the cost of housing in the city. So yeah, I'm a bit confused about that. And also, with this traffic calming stuff and making Ottawa easier to walk in, we really need to stop letting traffic engineers decide our priorities for streets. Stop having them prioritize speed over safety. I was talking to Councillor Curley the other day about getting a pedestrian crossing, getting the cycle time a bit lower, because it's almost 2 minutes as it is right now. And she sent me an email from staff saying they cannot do this. That's not true. They can do that. They just don't want to slow down the cars a tiny bit. And when I'm waiting there, even at rush hour, there's almost always a gap of good 20 or 30 seconds where I could walk across myself, put myself in danger, and cross the street. So it's really not going to slow down the car as much to cut down that cycle time by 20 or 30 seconds and make it more pleasant and safe to cross there. But staff says it cannot be done, which is not true. They should just tell you what the impacts of doing it would be, and councillors can decide for themselves what their constituents would prefer.
Although I
Cyril,
will
can
warn
I
that
just
sometimes, oh, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Cyril, the mayor made a commitment in his campaign to doubling the traffic calming budget. Last year, he told us that, well, and I think it was budget pressures, but the doubling of the budget is going to be accomplished by the end of this term of council. So can we expect to see our traffic calming budgets go up by some amount again?
Yeah, so you're right, you committed to going from 50 to 100. So we went 62.5 this year. And the goal is to get that to 75 this cycle and another 12 and a half, another 12 and a half.
So by the end of the term, it's 100. Okay.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, Nicholas, the one thing I was just going to say though is sometimes provincial laws prevent us from doing things that we want to as a city. For example, there is an intersection at Bay and Somerset, which right now has a signalized crosswalk and people are speeding through it. We're looking into what we can do and whether we can turn that into a signalized intersection. But unfortunately, the way that the provincial legislation is written, it is to maintain the flow of car traffic. So they might very well tell us that we cannot have intersections that close to each other. So sometimes when staff is saying we can't do something, it's not even a bylaw that we can change as a city, and that's something we have to push up the chain. And the other thing, I'll invite other folks on the call, including my own staff member, Stephanie Johnson, who works on traffic calming in my office. But again, temporary traffic calming is only one of the many tools we have available to fix streets. So if anyone on this call lives in Somerset Ward or in the wards of any of the councillors and you have specific hotspots you're concerned about, please do contact our office because we can go through the whole exhaustive list of options. And when you talk about residents wanting to help maintain this infrastructure, if you want to have a planter put in and if the city approves it in terms of traffic calming, we then ask neighbors to be guardians of that planter to take care of those plants, and lots of neighbors are happy to do that. So we're very happy for that participation.
Ariel, may I just
say,
it is somewhat problematic to allow residents themselves to put stuff on the street, not from a moral point of view or anything, but I would hate to see that there's a two-tier level of traffic calming where affluent neighborhoods, you have people putting in their traffic calming and they're putting in planters and they're doing all kinds of nice things to make a more pleasant environment. And then on less affluent streets, less engaged streets, that's not happening. The answer is for the city to adequately fund well-designed streets for people. The answer is not to put that on the residents who then are going to wind up, we're going to see it, two very different levels of public realm and safety. The answer is for the city to do it properly.
Wonderful. Yeah, for sure. But this is something everyone wants. I think the city could give quite a bit more money to this and just get it done faster instead of saying we'll get to Vision Zero, but before we do that, 20 people a year will be killed for the next 10 years until we do that.
It is relatively inexpensive. It's not just the cost of the traffic calming itself. Like I've been putting, there's a significant staff time cost associated with determining which traffic calming measures go in and then actually implementing them. Like it's not dirt cheap. If I run into a problem every year, I pretty much fully spend my traffic calming budget every year, and it's difficult to get the staff attention on my ward that I want because they're stretched too thin. We'd have to hire additional staff in the city as well. And my argument, of course, would be we should do that. We should have enough traffic calming specialists so that it becomes a much easier process. One of the other pieces that I think is undersold among residents is that infrastructure renewal budget is a lot of that is being spent on integrated street renewals. And those integrated street renewals, I know in the older neighborhoods, so I'm a big beneficiary of these. Ariel's ward is getting a whack of them. Sean's ward is getting a whack of them. Lane Johnson is not getting a whack of them because her streets are too new and it's a source of incredible frustration to her. But every time we redesign those streets, huge opportunity to do a lot of changes that would be prohibitively expensive if done proactively. But when you ripped the street up and then you have to put it together again, how you put it back together again, cost is really not a factor. Are you putting it in with 3-meter lanes, 3.5-meter lanes, cycle tracks, sidewalks, big sidewalks, small sidewalks, chicanes, speed bumps, bulb outs? Cost isn't even a factor when you're putting the street back together. The cost of rebuilding a street is digging up and putting new pipes in. So the traffic calming budget, I just want to make sure that there is some recognition that it is bolstered by, in some wards like ours, a very significant amount of money that's being spent on integrated street rebuilds that include, as a matter of council policy. Thanks to Sean for his work on this. Thanks, Jeff, for my work on this. By council policy, we're our residential streets are being rebuilt one at a time for 30-kilometer traffic. So that's been positive. I just want to make sure it's recognized that the TTC is not the only budget that's available. It's just the most flexible.
As is often said in the Capital Ward office, the temporary traffic calming budget is not a replacement for permanent traffic calming. And we can't let the city hive that out to us, that responsibility. So I'm going to cap it there just because we are a couple minutes over time. That was a really great intervention, Nicholas. In fact, all the interventions tonight were quite excellent. So I want to thank everybody on the call, the councillors on the call, my fellow staff members, city staff, and residents. Thanks so much, everyone. This will be recorded and posted online later. There's been a survey dropped in the chat a couple of times now. Please visit our websites and answer the budget survey. Okay, have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much,
Thank you, Miles.
everybody.
Thanks. Thank you,
Great
everyone.
night. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Tessa.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you,
Have a great night.
Cyril. Thanks, Suzanne. Thanks for being here. Have a great night.